Hi, I'm Salima Shivji, and I'm a reporter here in Mumbai. We're gearing up for the biggest election in history right now, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi looking very likely to win his third term. And whether you love him, hate him, or know nothing about him, there's no denying Modi is one of the most powerful political figures out there right now. Learn why in the newest season of Understood. Modi's India Understood, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
You are listening.
You're listening.
You're listening.
You're listening
To a TVO Today.
TVO Today.
to a TVO Today.
TVO Today
Podcast.
The following podcast contains coarse language, descriptions of violence, and sensitive themes which may not be suitable for younger audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Previously on Extradition.
Hey guys, I think I'm being followed.
It was one of the more bizarre conversations I've had in my entire life. When I would say Canadian citizen, he would say terrorist or splittist.
They treated him under Chinese law as though he were a Chinese citizen. But in becoming a Canadian citizen, he lost his Chinese nationality. They don't permit dual citizenship.
Now, when I ask about a prisoner, the Chinese know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for clemency. But I don't say that.
What I'm concerned about, Yusuf, I think in recent years, I think this case has almost fallen off the radar screen.
The last time they gave me a written response was in 2020. But never give up. Never give up.
When we uncovered that Chinese human rights defenders report in our investigation, we didn't know what to think. Under the list of political prisoners who were released from prison in 2021, there were 27 names. The last one is Huseyin Celil, which is Huseyin Celil's Chinese name. Had we been trying to find Huseyin in prison all this time when he had actually already been released? We did some fact-checking to see how credible this report was. It originated from a Chinese blog called Wei Chuan Wang, which translates to Rights Protection Network. It's run by a citizen journalist couple, Lu Yuyu and Li Tingyu. They post regularly about human rights abuses in China and have had their work profiled by Amnesty International and Reporters Without Borders. In 2016 and 2017, they were sentenced to 4 years in prison for crimes of, quote, picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Their detention was covered widely, even by the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. After their release, they fled China and came to Canada. They were awarded the Reporters Without Borders Freedom Prize in the category of citizen journalists. To us, they seemed to be pretty credible. The question was, how credible was their information? We reached out to them to learn more about their sources and waited for a response. We couldn't wrap our heads around the idea that Huseyin would have been released. Why would they release him? And how would Canada not know about it? In 2016, Huseyin's sentence was reduced from life to 20 years, but it hadn't been 20 years yet. However, Wei Chuan Wang and Chinese human rights defenders listed the sentence reduction as 15 years, not 20. And if we assume that his sentence didn't start over, he would have served a total of 15 years by 2021. So the math checked out. But the Chinese government has always been vague about his sentence. No one we spoke with seemed to know any concrete details about it. So, was it 15 or 20 years? Did his sentence start new or get drastically reduced? And, if he was released, where would he be? Where would I go? It's doubtful he'd be allowed back to Canada, so maybe he went back to his family in China.
Like, we need something to go off of, like an address, a phone number.
Which also points us to another problem.
They're missing.
Yes.
In 2017, Huseyin's wife Camilla lost all contact with his family in China. There was a fear that maybe they had been arrested. So, We checked the Xinjiang victims database to see if they had profiles. We knew their names and ages. But the database turned up no inmate profiles, which meant there was a good chance they weren't detained, just laying low. His mother would be 92 today, his sister would be 56, and his brother would be 66.
This is kind of a long shot, but there are journalists who spoke to them way back when and wrote these articles where they quoted them and stuff like that. Like reaching out to the journalists and be like, hey, is there any chance that you have an old contact?
I worked on the Celil case, I think it was around 2006. That was a story that I worked on for quite a while.
One of those journalists was Omar El Akkad, who's now a novelist and podcaster based in Portland, Oregon. But at the time, he was a reporter for the Globe and Mail in Canada.
And there were times that I was, fighting to get stories in the paper. You know what news media is like. Something's new the first time. The sixth time, it's like, yeah, he's still in prison. What do you got for me? And so I would be fighting just to sort of keep this guy from disappearing. And one of the hurdles we ran up against, and I suspect you're running up against this too, is that there's so many pockets of just negative space. Very, very difficult to find records, very difficult to find out what's happening inside these prisons.
Yeah, that was an understatement.
But we ended up covering the story for a while. I found a letter that he had written from jail, and we got a recording of audio from a conversation that he had when he was allowed to speak to one of his family members by phone.
The letter Omar is talking about was one we referenced earlier in the series. It was a letter from Huseyin addressed to his family, where he signed the number 1 prison at the end. It was first translated and published by the Globe and Mail. But the audio recording, I hadn't heard of.
Was that ever published or broadcasted?
I want to say yes, but again, 15, 20 years ago, so take all of this with a grain of salt.
Sadly, the audio recording Omar is describing was never published. I looked everywhere online. The only reference I could find was Omar's article from October 2008. Husein's mother and sister, who both live in China, managed to sneak a phone or recording device into one of their visits in the jail. According to Omar's description, the audio is grainy and often undecipherable. But what is clear is the sound of uncontrollable weeping.
It was a very, very poor recording of a phone conversation that was mostly two deeply emotional human beings, as you would expect.
I guess from your memory, who were your other sources that you spoke to while you were covering this story?
The guy to talk to here is Mehmet Toti. So he was the guy who was one of my central sources on all of this stuff, and I suspect that he was the person who got that information to me.
Did you ever speak with Hussein's other family, like his mother, his sister, brother?
I think at one point I got questions out to them through Mehmet, but I genuinely don't remember. I'm so sorry.
Omar's stories included quotes from Hussein's family in China, but he never interviewed them directly. He received information through his old source, Mehmet Toti. Perhaps he could get us to Hussein's family. And if he could, and if Huseyin had been released, maybe we would find him there. I'm Huseyin, and this is Extradition, the search for Huseyin Celil. Chapter 5, Long Walk to Freedom.
My name is Mehmet Tohti. I am the first generation Uyghur Canadian. And when I came to Canada in November 1998.
Mehmet, Omar's source, is a Uyghur activist who now lives and works in Ottawa. We drove out there to talk to him.
Later on, I learned that there were only 3 Uyghurs at that time across Canada. And so I was the first person applied a refugee status in Ontario. And so it is almost 25 years now living in this beautiful country.
Back in his hometown of Kashgar, Mehmet was a biology teacher at the local university. Now in Canada, he's taken on activism and started the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, which documents Chinese policies that target Uyghurs in China and abroad, and also helps bolster human rights activism. But according to Mehmet, being so outspoken about the Chinese government comes at a cost.
My brothers, sisters, their spouses, their children, and their parents, very first circle, very close relatives, disappeared. They are monitoring me very well.
On July 20th, 2020, Mehmet was just about to testify at the Subcommittee on International Human Rights on the situation of the Uyghurs.
It was 5 hours before my appearance in the Human Rights Subcommittee. Testify. I received one Twitter message. Your fucking mother is dead. I checked the message and it was from someone from Kunming City. Kunming is in the middle of Chinese mainland, more than 5,000 kilometers from the place where my mother used to live. When I received that message, I tried to calm down and I thought, okay, 2 scenarios. One is my mother is dead. Another is, if you go and testify, your mother will be dead. So what should I do?
Mehmet knew that if he chose not to speak, it would let the Chinese government know that intimidation and pressure works. So, he made the difficult decision to testify anyway. A few months later, he received another message.
And it said, my younger sister had heart attack. And my mother died heart attack. And my the youngest sister died in 8 months pregnancy, first child. And my brother, he wants to connect me to talk. He's lying in a bed. He said, I got that heart issue as well. And I said, okay, I'm good in Canada. I don't have a heart issue. What happened? You guys, everyone got heart issue.
To this day, Mehmet doesn't believe his whole family all received heart attacks at the same time. But his mother and his 2 younger sisters all died. Somehow. Only his brother survived.
The whole time, I can't help but think, I mean, obviously of your family and of so many others, but because we're looking at Huseyin's story, that Huseyin is in the middle of all that right now. Do you know?
Yeah, personally, I know him. He's a very kind man. He's a family man. Canadian government officials puzzled. Why the one state like China just put so much effort just to arrest and deport the Uyghur Canadian to China? What the Chinese government gained from it? At that time, Stephen Harper was the prime minister, and I met with him 3 times and tried to explain. It is not about Huseyin Celil. It was about, in Chinese philosophy, hit one bird to scare the rest. The message is just, okay, even you're a Canadian citizen or you're holding a passport from Western countries, we can trace you and hunt you down and we can bring you back to China. It was a message for all Uyghur activists.
Do you believe Huseyin is still alive?
I don't know.
Have you ever heard anything about his whereabouts or status?
Since 2017, even his relatives in back home couldn't able to communicate. No. And it is a national disgrace for us.
Mehmet didn't have any recent contacts for Huseyin's family in China, which made the task of confirming if he was released or not much harder.
How realistic does that sound to you, to say that, we want to...
It is over. They can't have lost the momentum. Maybe, I don't want to that pessimistic, but maybe the children at some point will visit his grave. Train left already. The train left already.
On the drive home from Ottawa, I sat in the car feeling defeated. I didn't want to think that Husein's children would only ever see their dad again at his grave. And I refused to believe that the train had left to find Huseyin. If he is still alive, that means he's still in China. And if he isn't alive, well, that's worth knowing too. Mehmet said he handed over everything he had on the case to Camilla, who, again, wasn't speaking publicly anymore.
You know, when you think about it, Yusuf, I mean, she's been at this for 20 years, right? God knows how many media interviews she has done.
I called Alex Neve, the former Secretary General for Amnesty International Canada, who previously spoke to us about the case. I was hoping he might be able to help and maybe put us in touch with Camilla.
And while, you know, it's no biggie for me to do yet another interview on Huseyin, for her, every interview takes her back into the zone, brings the emotions back.
I understood and wanted to respect her wishes, but I still needed something or someone to point me in the direction of Husein's family in China.
You know, you might ask, it makes me wonder, you know, I was telling you about Wilf and all his interesting, quirky...
He told me about a man named Wilf Ruland, who's a volunteer for Amnesty International Canada, and has been a friend of the family since Huseyin was arrested. Unlike Mehmet, who lost hope that Huseyin was still alive, Wilf continues to run the advocacy campaign for Huseyin Celil to this day, after 17 years.
Wilf knows all the kids really well and is just kind of a little bit more wrapped up in how she lives her life. That might be something to ask him.
Okay, great. We'll definitely speak to him as soon as possible then. That's great. Thank you.
Finally meet you. Kevin.
Morning. Thank you. It's a beautiful home and property.
Just wanted to this stuff.
What's his name? Benji.
We drove out to Wilf's home in Oakville, Ontario. His house was surrounded by dense woods, and only the sounds of birds and crickets could be heard. His dog enthusiastically greeted us at the door.
Do you have a preference? You prefer to be in here, or?
I'm good with whatever works for you. You guys
Are you here, or what?
yeah. Sit at the table too.
No, let's sit.
As soon as we walked into his living room, I saw a dining table piled high with files, newspaper clippings, and banker's boxes, all with Husein's name and photos of him. Wilf had pulled his old files and notes from working on this case for us to look through. We were there to ask for contact details of Hussein's family, but I couldn't help stare at the stacks. I wanted to know what was in them.
Yeah, I had the stuff out on the table just to refresh my memory.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of different things over the years.
I'm sure. About 17 years.
Yeah.
Wilf got involved in Hussein's case in 2006 when he was the coordinator of the Burlington Amnesty Group.
And when Amnesty learned of Hussein's arrest and extradition to China, the staff were feeling really badly about this. They did some research and found that his wife Camilla lived in Burlington. They took up a collection in the office and put together a gift basket for her with, you know, a nice note from them. I came to her door, gave her the gift basket. She invited me in. We started talking about Huseyin, about the case, about Amnesty. She was wondering if Amnesty could help, you know, beyond the gift basket. I promised to put in a good word with the staff at the national office.
Wilf kept his promise. He assembled 3 other local Amnesty chapters to get involved in advocating for Hussein's release. Their campaign involved things like organizing protests, garnering media attention, and writing letters to the Canadian and Chinese governments. When Hussein's prison location and address became known, Wilf targeted the letter-writing campaign towards Huseyin and the prison director. They wanted him in the prison to know that his family and Canadians were fighting for his release. The goal was to get a response back.
Have you ever, gotten any sort of confirmation that any letters have reached him?
We're pretty sure they're not. We do know that the letters had an effect because he was in solitary confinement. He wasn't getting enough to eat and he was not getting the medical attention that he needed. When we learned about this from his family, we shifted our letter writing campaign to ask Chinese authorities just on a humanitarian basis to end the solitary confinement.
According to Wilf, the letters seemed to have worked. He learned that the solitary confinement was eventually lifted, and Huseyin was able to get more food, medical attention, and even mix with the other inmates. Wilf and other Amnesty volunteers have sent thousands of letters like this. In addition to the letters, Wilf became very close with Husein's family to help support them, taking her kids to their soccer games while Camilla was busy at work, raising money for emergency payments, even running a 5K with one of her sons for his school fundraiser.
I really can't fathom how Camilla has done it these last 17 years, raising the 4 boys and supporting her family and coordinating the work on her husband's case. It's been a really nice one to be able to help out from time to time.
Before I got to asking Wilf about Husein's mother or relatives in China, he said this.
Yeah, one thing in your sleuthing, it would not be helpful to be trying to contact Hussein's family in Xinjiang.
Why is that?
Anybody in Xinjiang, any Uyghur in Xinjiang that is contacted from the outside immediately goes on the list of suspects.
So even just calling their number would put them at risk? Just a foreign number?
Soon as there's something from outside.
Well, that stopped the search. We had no intention of harming Hussein's family, and maybe that's why everyone lost contact with them. So, we would have to find another way to figure out if he had been released.
Before we wrap up, because I'd love to just have you take us through what you have on that table.
It's not very organized, but
that's
there's
okay.
A lot of it.
We moved over to the table, and Wilf started taking us through everything.
This is the oldest stuff down here, and then there's endless reams of things on my laptop. This is just stuff that I have hard copies of.
There are newspaper clippings dated back to when Huseyin was first arrested in 2006, old pamphlets created by Amnesty for their advocacy work, and letters from the Canadian government with the same boilerplate responses.
So this is the only thing we've ever gotten from China. That's the book that I sent Huseyin.
Oh, that they sent back.
Yeah.
Sitting on top of a mailing envelope was the book that never reached Huseyin, Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. The book chronicles Mandela's 28-year term in prison and his pursuit for justice.
So here it is, director of the prison. All that for Mr. Huseyin Celil from me.
Return to sender.
And then this is Chinese for return to sender. But still, we know it got to the prison. We know they looked at it and thought,
Right.
Best thing we can do.
That's
is
the
send
last
it
book
back.
they want any inmate to read.
Yeah. There were at one point, I think, 6 or 7 different magazine subscriptions. He was getting Canadian Geographic. Like, they can't be human rights oriented,
right,
or current news oriented. You can't send Newsweek or anything. But Better Homes and Gardens, Canadian Geographic.
It's almost a humorous image to picture Huseyin reading Better Homes and Gardens.
Yeah, and you're basically always keeping it foremost in people's minds, and our goal in Amnesty is to be really a bit of a pain in the butt.
Wilf's philosophy was interesting, and it made me think that maybe our phone calls to the prison and staff were hopefully doing the same thing.
And we use the analogy of a tree branch, with snowflake after snowflake falling onto that tree branch, wet snow. And over time, that snow builds up, and at some point the tree branch cracks. And you can't really say which one of the snowflakes caused the tree branch to crack. They all did it together, but your one letter makes a difference. Eventually you get the government to crack and let the guy go. Oh, this is the teacher from St. Thomas More, the one that organized the assembly and the silent vigil.
Wilf showed us some files of an incident that happened in 2011 between the Chinese consulate in Canada and a high school in Hamilton called St. Thomas More Catholic Secondary School. The school held an assembly and a letter-writing campaign to raise awareness about Hussein's case generating about 750 letters. The plan was to deliver these letters to the Chinese consulate in Toronto, but the consulate didn't like that.
They said, no, we're not going to speak with you, and, we don't give you permission to come to the consulate to deliver the cards.
The consulate expressed that the students were, quote, misled by irresponsible remarks and some twisted bias coverage. They were even told not to interfere with Chinese affairs. Quote, these letters are not good for China. You must stop now. It is not possible for us to meet with your students.
Then the students, who felt very strongly that their cards should be delivered, decided to do that in the form of holding a silent vigil in front of the consulate.
Wow.
Let's see what else we got here.
What's that folder there?
Sitting on top of one of the banker's boxes, I noticed a large manila folder that was almost as thick as a phone book.
These were my notes from my first meeting with Camilla.
Oh, wow.
Wilf made a habit to visit Camilla and her kids every few months. Camilla would share with Wilf what information she learned about Husein's status from his family in China. The family visited Huseyin regularly for a few years and would pass on information to Camilla on how he was doing. For the first time, we were reading accounts of what life looked like for Huseyin inside the Xinjiang No. 1 prison.
Maybe we should take photos. Is it okay if we take
Yeah, absolutely.
photos?
We went back and organized the photos chronologically, which allowed us to create a timeline. Here's that timeline of visits from Husein's family to the No. 1 prison. Hussein's mother and sister visit him in jail in January and April of 2009. It's a 2-day trip for them from Kashgar to Urumqi, where the jail is. Later that year, external communications to Xinjiang are shut down, and no one has heard any updates for months.
No one has seen Huseyin since April.
Yeah, the Chinese kind of regularly shut down communications to Xinjiang before the big clampdown in 2017.
On November 20th, 2009, Canadian Foreign Affairs sent an ambassador to visit Hussein's mother and sister in Kashgar. Thankfully, they're okay, but communications outside the region are still down due to protests and riots.
Fully due to protests. He wrote a letter to his mom in June, asking to send books, asking about Camilla and boys.
During this period of lockdown, Huseyin was able to get a letter to his mother. In it, he complained about his medical issues and being held in prolonged solitary confinement. He asked about his wife and kids and wanted to know how they were doing. He also asked if he could be sent books to read. His preference was English history and mystery novels, but nothing political.
Last week, December 2nd, 2009, Mum and 4 others, 3 siblings, were able to meet with him for 50 minutes. Were able to be in a room with him. Was okay holding his own, still in solitary.
Eyes
hurting because the cell is very dark. I wasn't remembering this, so there were at least 2 letters that did get to him from Camilla.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
In 2010, the communication blackout in Xinjiang has lifted. Camilla learns that some of her letters to Huseyin have actually gotten through to him. By this point, it's been 4 years since his arrest.
Had been seen by a doctor and received meds, still 1 meal a day, but family were able to bring lots of food.
On June 18th, 2010, Camilla learns his mother and sister visited him again in March. The visit lasts about 28 minutes. Wilf's notes mention Huseyin still complaining about his stomach problems.
Huseyin has not received books or magazines yet. We're continuing to send food.
His family visits him again in August that same year. They say he's okay, but not getting enough exercise or daylight. He's also still not receiving any materials from Canada.
Family brings clothing, blankets, was able to receive bread last time. Still not allowed to go outside.
The last visit of 2010 comes on October 28th. The jail is starting to lift his solitary confinement. he's still not able to go outside the facility. His family is able to bring him clothing and blankets, and he was even able to receive bread.
Latest visit to Huseyin in 2012 March. Only allowed to speak from behind window.
The next update comes 2 years later, in 2012. His family are only able to speak to him behind a window with a speakerphone. They bring him clothes, but the food is not accepted anymore. He still seems to be in solitary confinement.
Family visit per half hour, sister and daughter. Complaining about visits
only every 6 months.
Only every 6 months.
He's lost a lot of weight, is very unhappy.
Still same prison.
From this point on, the updates get much less regular. In 2013, the family visits are lasting half an hour, and only once every 6 months. Huseyin complains about this and wants to see his family more regularly. They notice that he's lost a lot of weight.
Not receiving clothes, bed sheets that are being sent prisoners.
So I guess they're trying to send him stuff and that's not getting through.
Right. Prisoners are not getting clothes or food from outside due to change in prison procedures. Family won't allow to give it to him, not allowed to bring. Sister, weary and angry, is
very mad and angry.
Oh, very mad and angry.
In April 2014, Huseyin is still having medical issues, mainly with his stomach. He's no longer entirely in isolation anymore, but it's unclear what that means. December 2015. His sister was able to visit him in the fall. The visit lasts 40 to 45 minutes, with 3 to 6 guards present. November 2018. Camilla hasn't heard anything from Husein's family. She hears that anyone traveling abroad is being sent to concentration camps for Uyghurs, and isn't even sure if his mom is alive anymore.
If I'm remembering it correctly, the mom has passed away.
Okay.
The dad's still alive. And know nothing about the rest of the family.
December 2019. It's now been over 3 years since Camilla's heard from Husein's family. There are no responses to calls or messages. Finally, in March of 2020, the Canadian ambassador, Dominic Barton, calls Camilla. She asks if he can send someone to Kashgar to check on Hussein's family. Barton assures her that efforts are still continuing to gain access to Huseyin. Camilla's response to this was, "Never mind access. Ask for him to be released." And that's the last update from Wilf's Notes. Because the notes ended in 2020, there was no indication that Huseyin was allegedly released in 2021. With Wilf warning us that looking for Hussein's family could put them at risk, our team got together to try to call the prison staff again. Of course, that wasn't without risks either. It's possible some of the guards are forced to work there, and any foreign calls could endanger their lives. Or maybe our questions would put Huseyin in more danger. The last thing we wanted to do was put Huseyin or his family at risk, even if it meant not finding any information about him. But then, is that it? If we stop searching, the status quo stays the same. Huseyin remains lost, and nothing changes. How do you find someone in a system that doesn't want them to be found? I tried to remember what Wilf said, that maybe if we kept calling, kept annoying, kept asking, they might crack and tell us something, just to get us off their backs. Keep the snowflakes falling on the tree branch.
Everyone ready?
Yep.
Me, our translator, and our producers, Kevin and Tiff, geared up to call the number 1 prison again. This call started off like the other ones. Our translator asks if the person on the line worked at the number 1 prison. The person who picked up asked what was up. And our translator then went on their spiel, how we're looking for Huseyin Celil. But this time, they asked if Huseyin had been released or not. The guy then says we had the wrong number, but our translator presses on, asking again if the guy had in fact heard of Huseyin. The guard softly says he doesn't know. Then he says he's not sure. Our translator describes Huseyin, that he was a Canadian citizen and his wife was also in Canada. All of a sudden, the guy's tone changes drastically. He sternly says Canadians shouldn't call Chinese people. The translator tries to reason with him, making the point that Huseyin is Chinese. But the guy isn't having any of it, and says he's not Chinese anymore, so he can't ask anything of China. Our translator then asks if there's anyone else we can call for more information. The guard gives us the number to call the emergency response line, kind of like our 911. Our translator thanks him, and he hangs up.
Okay.
Oh my fucking god. No, he didn't say anything, but what he said was so stupid. Like, he's Canadian, he's not Chinese, why are you calling? He was pretty angry.
It's ironic that he said he's not Chinese, but Canadian, given that the Chinese government claims the opposite. We kept trying, this time with a Ukrainian number, to switch things up.
I'm gonna make a very dark joke. If I get arrested, you guys have to do a podcast over.
I absolutely will come save your ass.
Yeah, I mean, then we're all gonna end up in jail, so we'll just come for joining you.
It's true, we will all be there with you.
This time, our translator doesn't ask if they worked at the number one. They go right into the question. Has Huseyin been released? The person responds, I don't understand what you're talking about. Our translator continues to explain who Huseyin is, and that he has family overseas who haven't heard from him. The person starts to get impatient, repeatedly asking, what do you want? Then he asks, so his family is engaged in riots overseas, and he got involved in terrorism there? This caught our translator off guard, and they ask, so you've heard of this? The guard then says, he is a criminal, right? The state should eradicate people like him. Our translator tries to explain the situation, but the man keeps cutting him off, saying, this is a state affair. What good will it do to ask me? He says, if you're really resourceful, you can ask Chairman Xi, meaning President Xi Jinping. He goes on, Chairman Xi is in charge of this. Our translator still wants to know how he knew Huseyin was involved in terrorism. The man points out that our number is from Ukraine. He asks if Huseyin was involved in riots and participating in training in Ukraine. He then says, what were you thinking? How can you call me like this? Our translator starts to explain that they're just trying to know if Husein's been released. The guard interrupts. He seems angry. He says, is there something wrong with your brain? You're calling me from this number and then asking me about a Uyghur person. Is this appropriate? He goes on. You're helping his family, then that shows you're also a terrorist. Where are you now? Please tell me so I can call the Ministry of National Security. Our translator tells him we're in Canada. But the guard is suspicious because of the caller ID. The man asks if Huseyin engaged in riots in Canada, to which our slightly perplexed translator responds, why would they engage in riots in Canada? The man is pretty worked up at this point. He says, it looks like Western capitalist ideology's will to end us won't die. And then he makes it personal and asks our translator if they're Chinese, Canadian, or a foreigner. We hung up after that.
It's kind of scary.
The calls kept getting more and more heated. At least we knew we were definitely annoying them. No one was able to confirm if Huseyin was released or not. At this point, we didn't know what to think. We did finally get a response back from the people who published the report saying that Huseyin had been released. They said they couldn't reveal who their source was, but they would reach out to those within the Great Firewall and get back to us. It was something.
Because hypothetically, like, if we do call him, they say, yeah, he's released. He's not in the prison anymore. I feel like the responsible thing to do, if the goal is to have Huseyin come back to Canada, is not to just publish it.
It's to tell the government.
It's to tell the government, do it through backroom channels, I guess.
The Canadian government's official statement is that they are actively engaged on the case of Mr. Celil. But whenever we reach out for an interview or a request for comment, they decline. So what does that mean? Well, probably one of two things. There was either some sort of backroom dealing that we didn't know about, what the Canadian government likes to call quiet diplomacy. Or they were hiding behind the comment of essentially no comment, and they really weren't doing anything at all. Maybe it was time to try to find out just how engaged they were. And if they knew something, we didn't. Next time, on the last episode of Extradition.
As far as I know, it's been a number of years since there's been any information about Mr. Celil's situation.
What does the government know about Huseyin Celil's current status? I mean, is he even alive or dead?
I think it's important to talk to Global Affairs about those details.
How can we, though, confirm that what Global Affairs Canada is saying is true?
We can't confirm that that's true. We don't know what those conversations look like.
What would you do differently on the Huseyin Celil file?
I've seen this case over the years, and it's just, I don't know what to do about it.
喂，你好，我是玉江山吉利利他家人的朋友。受不了有人干些他妈的特务的事情，你天天在这打什么电话呢？傻逼 ！So aggressive.
Extradition is written and produced by me, Huseyin, and Kevin Young. Tiffany Lamb is our producer and editor for TVO Today podcasts. Kevin Young is also our audio engineer. Our story editor is Michelle Shepard. Our legal counsel is Willa Marcus. Production support from Jonathan Hallowell, Ariana Longley, Vito Tagarelli, Jeff Kusura, and Jennifer DeRosa. Artwork by Jasmine L. Kurd. Katie O'Connor is managing editor for podcasts and digital video at TVO Today. Our executive producer of digital for TVO Today is Lori Few. John Ferry is Vice President of Programming and Content for TVO Today. Theme song and music by Blue Dot Sessions and Audio Network. Extradition is produced by Innerspeak and TVO Today.